I never really wanted to be part of any scene. I just wanted to make music that sounded different and wasn't like anything else that I'd heard before.
So, Aphex Twin, producer, composer, and a music genius, Richard D. James spent decades pushing electronic sound into uncharted territory. You are watching the Lester Beer YouTube channel. Let's get started. From ambient masterpieces and breakbeat experiments to disturbing music videos and legendary live performances, his influence can still be heard across modern music. This is the story of how a curious teenager from Cornwall became one of the most important electronic musicians of all time. Richard David James was born in Ireland in 1971 and grew up in Cornwall in southwest England. From childhood, he was fascinated by music and engineering. After trying his hand at the piano, he quickly grew bored. James then decided to dissect the piano, following in the footsteps of John Cage, whose work he was not yet familiar with at the time. James bought his first instruments for small sums and modified them in his home workshop. He was deeply impressed when his family purchased a ZX Spectrum home computer in the 1980s. James became fascinated by the sounds the device made while loading programs. Later, he incorporated this influence into his own work. James' youth coincided with the heyday of British rave culture. However, Aphex Twin wasn't a big fan of dance music, even though he performed DJ sets. In the 80s and early 90s, James wrote music under a variety of pseudonyms: Caustic Window, Polygon Window, Blue Calx, Phonic Boy on Dope, Ricardo Gemira, and many others. This creative approach allowed him to avoid long gaps between releases and explore different musical directions. His main styles became hard techno, ambient, and what would later be known as IDM. He borrowed his main pseudonym Aphex Twin from Aphex System Limited, a company that manufactures audio equipment. Aphex Twin's first full-length album was Selected Ambient Works 8592. Released by Apollo in 1992 and consisting largely of material recorded several years earlier. The opening track, Crystal, became one of the artist's signature works. This composition blended techno and ambient, essentially creating a crossover between the two genres. The same can be said of tracks such as Pulse with Talme and Tha. Despite the word ambient in the title, the album doesn't directly follow the traditional ambient formula, which typically lacked a rhythm section. Instead, Aphex Twin helped create a new approach to ambient music, in which drum machines played a major role. Riding the wave of his success, Aphex Twin signed with Warp Records, the label that would become his creative home for many years. There, in 1994, James released a follow-up to his previous album, Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. James named Steve Reich as his favorite composer of the 20th century, and Reich's influence is evident from the album's opening track, Cliffs. The darker side of ambient music is revealed in tracks such as Radiator, Grey Stripe, and Matchsticks, the latter sounding like a soundtrack to an obscure 1980s horror film. In contrast, Rhubarb remains one of the brightest and purest pieces of electronic music ever recorded. A long, dreamy melody wanders around a handful of notes that seem to fill the entire space. Selected Ambient Works Volume 2 is often regarded as one of the definitive ambient albums, incorporating many of the genre's earlier achievements while pushing it in several different directions: dark ambient, light ambient, rhythmic ambient, and beatless ambient. Thanks to this release, Aphex Twin began to be regarded as a serious composer, even though representatives of the old academic avant-garde were less enthusiastic. As his fame grew and his industry connections expanded throughout the 90s, James began writing a significant amount of music for commercials. Some brands also licensed previously released tracks, including Donkey Rhubarb. commercial side of the music business never seemed to bother Aphex Twin, and he was perfectly willing to use his talent to make a fortune and live comfortably. I Care Because You Do blended jungle, trip-hop inspired and down-tempo tracks such as Awkward of a Jam Shred, industrial and noise experiments like Ventolin, as well as carefully crafted dramatic compositions such as Alberto Balsam. This eclectic album served as a precursor to 1996 Richard D. James album. Aphex Twin recorded much of the album using Macintosh software. He became fascinated with programming drum parts on a computer and expanding these possibilities of rhythm. Although jungle can be heard at the core of many tracks, Richard transformed the genre, speeding up and twisting the beats to their limits. The track Girl Boy Song was Aphex Twin's attempt to create a pop composition. Meanwhile, Force seemed to reinvent the role of the rhythm section in electronic music, while Cornish Acid laid some of the groundwork for the sound he would revisit years later on Syro. Two singles from the late 90s made Aphex Twin world famous. Come to Daddy from 1997 was James' response to drum and bass and industrial music. The chilling refrain, distorted guitar, and the scream that sends shivers down the spine helped turn the track into one of the defining horror anthems of the decade. In the 1999 cult classic Window Licker, the musician poked fun at both pop and rap culture. By the way, check out my previous video. A long-form music video accompanied the release, telling the story of men trying to impress women only to find themselves trapped in a surreal parade of absurdity. Window Licker unfolds like a musical. Melodies shift constantly, while the tempo speeds up and slows down. The track moves from electric grooves to noisy industrial textures before ending with sounds that seem designed to parody sexual excess in popular music. With Window Licker, James appeared to draw a line under the history of 90s electronic music, and in a symbolic sense, he succeeded.
The track marked the end of a decade of constant transformation in pop culture, while also closing out both a century and a millennium.
By the early 2000s, Aphex Twin had built a cult following. Electronic music fans wore a t-shirt featuring his black and white logo, which had become almost as recognizable as the cover of Unknown Pleasures or the Rolling Stones' famous town logo. Richard D. James made a fortune from remixes and commissioned work, making no secret of his ambitions. He even released a compilation titled 26 Mixes for Cash.
At the same time, he had little interest in becoming a conventional pop producer.
Famously, he turned down the opportunity to work with Madonna because he didn't want to become permanently associated with her massive career. Aphex Twin released the sprawling album Drugs in 2001, expressing his love for avant-garde music. Sources of inspiration for its electroacoustic sound include Krzysztof Penderecki, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and Steve Reich. The track Nano 2 evokes delicate music box melodies, while the lead single Avril 14th is a piano composition without any electronic manipulation, a rarity in James' catalog. Aphex Twin would later revisit some of these ideas on the EP Computer Control Acoustic Instruments Part 2, released 14 years later in 2015. Then he just stopped releasing music. During that time, many fans stopped believing he would ever return under the name, even though he never stopped creating music or performing live. In 2014, however, James made a triumphant comeback with Syro, which won a Grammy Award, the first of his career. To create the album, he used a vast collection of synthesizers, once again demonstrating that analog sound still had limitless possibilities and taking his passion for hardware to an even higher level. In 2014, researcher Dave Barstone interviewed Aphex Twin. What captivated many readers was James' story about his time in Moscow. Soon afterward, the interview disappeared from the Noise Lab website, although archived versions remain available. Whether some of the stories were completely true or partly exaggerated remains unclear. However, photographs of James in Moscow, most likely dating back to the 1990s, can still be found online, and several people claim to have seen him at parties. He eventually married a Russian woman named Anastasia. In 2024, Richard D. James released a compilation of tracks, music from the merch desk, that had previously appeared on limited vinyl releases sold during tours or through his online store. The result is 2.5 hours of curated material that offers a fascinating snapshot of Aphex Twin's creative evolution. There is techno, drill and bass, noise, and almost every side of his musical personality, with the exception of ambient. Over the years, James has given remarkably few interviews and has rarely participated in the machinery of celebrity culture. For him, the music has always mattered more than the personality behind it. At the same time, he has admitted that he can write several tracks in a single day, making it nearly impossible to remember every detail of the creative process. Richard D. James permanently changed the landscape of electronic music, and his influence continues to be felt across generations of producers, composers, and listeners.
More than 30 years after his debut, Aphex Twin remains one of the electronic music's most unpredictable and fascinating figures. Whether trapped in ambient landscapes, hyperactive drum programming, or completely unclassifiable experiments, Richard D. James has spent his career refusing to follow anyone else's rules. Thank you for watching. Feel free to share your favorite Aphex Twin albums in the comments and subscribe for more stories about music. Bye!